Okay, so good afternoon everybody. My name's Simon. I work on behalf of the NFB. Today we're going to be talking specifically about the impact of the new CDM 2015 regulations. I've provided a brief overview of the regulations as well that I'd like to discuss with you before we go on to the general impact that it has. So first and foremost, we'll talk about the actual regulations themselves. Now, they came into force in the 6th of April in 2015, and obviously they replaced the old CDM 2007 regulations. Now, they're split up into 5 specific parts. Part 1 looks into the interpretation and talks about the actual contents of the CDM regulation, and also describes the definitions of what is classed as construction work. The key thing to remember about the new CDM 2015 is that it applies to both domestic and now to commercial as well. So domestic and commercial now, both. Part 2 deals with specific duties placed upon the client themselves. And again, this is both for commercial and to domestic. So domestic clients now have specific duties that they need to adhere to. Part 3 refers to other health and safety duties and roles placed on other people. Now, specifically under this part of the regulations, there has been a new role introduced, which is the principal designer. Now, there's no longer duties for the CDM coordinator under the new CDM regulations. The principal designer is one of the new roles. Part 4 applies to construction safety for all sites. So all aspects of construction, Part 4 will apply to. And it is essentially the old Construction, Health, Safety and Welfare Regulations 96. Finally, Part 5 deals with specific enforcement in respect of fire and advises that there's a schedule in place for transitional provisions from the old CDM 2007. Now, when the HSE introduced these regulations, they also accompanied them with a new guidance document. Now, the guidance document has replaced the old approved codes of practice. Now, the guidance document can be downloaded, and it is L153. At the moment in time, the HSE are quite happy just to leave the guidance document in place and not implement a new approved code of practice. That's because they like to leave it in place for around about 18 months, while they get opinions from people to see whether or not a replacement approved code of practice is actually required or not. So there are some specific transitional arrangements in place for projects. So there are some specific transitional arrangements in place. Now, specifically this applies to projects that would have started perhaps before, so construction projects that were started before the 6th of April 2015. Now, the actual transitional provisions are that if there is, or expected to be, more than one contractor on a project, we have to apply transitional periods, and also where the construction phase has not yet started and the client has not yet appointed a CDM coordinator, they must appoint a principal designer as soon as possible, as soon as practicable. If the CDM coordinator has already been appointed, so the construction phase has already started, the client must then appoint a principal designer to replace the CDM coordinator by the 6th of October 2015, unless the project ends before that date. And in the period it takes to appoint the principal designer, the CDM coordinator that's in place has to comply with the duties contained under Schedule 4 of CDM 2015. Now, these reflect the similar duties that were placed on the CDM coordinators under CDM 2007, rather than requiring the CDM coordinator to fulfill a role as a principal designer, which they may not be equipped to be able to fulfill. Now, what this specifically means is that it doesn't mean that there's going to be an end of the CDM coordinator's role. So they may not be useless, they may not be classed as defunct. So CDMCs can act as consultants to both clients and to the new role of the principal designer. So they can act as consultants themselves and provide information and assistance to clients and principal designers. However, I must stress that there is no role for the CDMC under or specific duties under the new regulations. So essentially, the CDMC's role as part of regulations has disappeared completely. However, they can act as consultants as and when required. Now, a large part of the CDM regulations is placed upon competency. So we need to appoint people, we need to ensure that the people that we appoint are competent. Now, there are a couple of things that we can do to ensure that we are ensuring that people that we're appointing are specifically competent. Now, firstly, if we are part of an SSIP scheme, so a safety scheme in procurement, such as CHAS or construction line, the schemes themselves will assist you with pre-qualification questions. Now, what I would say that is if you're not using an SSIP, then we should be adhering to a British standard called PAS 91. And what that does, it sets a standard for pre-qualification. And how it works is it provides a set of questions to be asked by buyers of potential suppliers, which will enable the pre-qualification of construction projects. So it's quite a useful tool to make sure that the people that we are appointing are deemed as competent. The only downside, if there is a downside, or one thing that you might need to consider when it comes to PAS 91, is that it doesn't give advice on good or bad responses to the actual questions themselves. So it's good for actually setting the pre-qualification questions, but when the information comes back to you, you may need to seek advice from an external consultant or a consultant within your business to ensure that they meet the pre-qualification questions and the questions are adequate, the answers are adequate. Now, CDMC has been made a little bit easier, and what I've done is I have stolen, if you like, some details from the CITB with regards to the changes to the actual regulations. So the next slide that you're going to see is something that's made it simple for you. So this is provided directly from CITV. So if we look to start off with, it specifically says that the 2015 regulations for all projects must have, first and foremost, workers with the right skills, knowledge, training and experience. So that would fit in specifically with our SSIP schemes that we've got in place already, or with our PAS 91 questionnaires, so that we can ensure that the people that we are employing are specifically competent. It also states that contractors providing appropriate supervision, instruction and information, so we have to employ contractors as well that are willing to provide supervision and instruction and information to the people that they are employing and perhaps subcontracting work out to. What it specifically asks for as well is that we have a written construction phase plan in place. Now this is for all construction projects. So all construction projects must have a written construction phase plan in place. And I'm going to come back to that, so I'm going to discuss that in a little bit further depth with you. So that's part one. Part one, all projects must have the following. The second part to it is that if there's a project that has more than one contractor involved, and remember it applies to both domestic and non-domestic, it's all of section 1 plus we must appoint a principal designer and we must appoint a principal contractor, and there's a specific need for a health and safety file. The reason why they've introduced this is obviously there's been a lot of incidents or accidents associated with the smaller construction sites. So on smaller construction sites, basically they're saying if we have more than one contractor in place, one of them has to act as a principal contractor, and basically they need to be in charge of the health and safety for that site. So one person needs to be in charge of health and safety. The principal designer's role is something that is actually quite a good role, and it probably enhanced the actual the designer's functions. Previously what might have happened is on a construction site you may have had multiple designers designing separate pieces of items or equipment and designing them up to the actual standards required to install them, but because there's no specific coordination or cooperation between the other designers, no thoughts were placed upon how these designs were going to fit together or be integrated together. Because we've introduced this new principal designer's role, this principal designer takes charge of all the other designers and ensures effective communication, cooperation between all the designers on site. So basically, all designs are made to be fitted together to ensure that they reduce the risk to safety to as low as reasonably practicable. Just going back to the actual principal contractor as well, who's in charge of the site itself, CITB have got a CDM wizard that can assist them with the actual safety itself. So I think it's a website that you can go on, but it's also an app that you can download to your phone. And what it does, it gives advice to contractors for what is required for specific sites. So it'll ask you details about the start date of the site, the location, what the job roles are, how many people are going to be working on site, and it will give you advice on what's required. I would have liked to have included it in the presentation, but it would have been a 100-odd page presentation, I believe, if I'd have done that. So I've decided to not bother with that one. So Part 1 applies to all construction projects. Part 2 specifically applies to projects where there's more than one contractor involved. Part 3 applies if the work is scheduled to last longer than 30 working days and have more than 20 workers working simultaneously at any point in the project, or if the project will exceed 500 person days. All of sections 1 and 2 apply the previous 2 slides, but also the client must notify the project to the HSE. So you'll see the differences between this and the old regulations, where they've included now that 20 workers working simultaneously at any one point. Now, it is the responsibility of the client to ensure that the project is notified to the HSE, so it is their responsibilities. How the regulations are geared up is to ensure that, firstly, nobody accepts appointments unless they are competent to fulfil the roles themselves, and they have to offer advice to the client, so they have to make the client aware of their legal responsibilities under the CDM 2015 regulations. Now, specifically what we found with regards to the actual construction phase plan, so jumping around, going back to the construction phase plan that's required, is that a lot of companies currently on the market are offering services to produce construction phase plans. Now, what we found is that a lot of these construction phase plans seem to be very genetic. So the ones that you purchase off the internet seem to be very generic, and they don't seem to be detailed enough for certain construction sites. So what I would advise, if you are looking to purchase a construction phase plan, then I would take advice from your organisation to take advice from your own industry guidance. So you could refer to the NFB, for example. CITB will be another area that you could refer to before actually purchasing these construction phase plans. They've got to be suitable and sufficient for the tasks that are going to be undertaken on site. Now, one of the things that we've tried to do for you, because obviously we wanted to talk to you about the impact of the actual CDM 2015 regulations, is that we wanted to find out what the HSE had found anything out from, for example, prosecutions or feedbacks. I've not been able to find anything specifically out, so there's been no details published as of yet from the HSE. As soon as we get that, we're going to publish it on our website. Now, there could be a specific impact on the designer themselves. So the designer's role obviously has changed now, and a lot of the designers will now find themselves fulfilling the role of a principal designer. Now, a lot of them, but not all of them, I should stress, not all of them, will require upskilling because there may be gaps in their competence under the new construction design management regulations. So a lot of them haven't got the competency to be able to fulfill the role as a principal designer. Now, this is where the CDMC, so the CDM coordinator from the old regulations, can offer assistance. So they can come in and they can offer advice as consultants to help fill those gaps. But I would stress that this doesn't apply to all designers, it's just some of them. Now, I said to you that we've not found anything about from the HSE about prosecutions or feedback yet to report. Some things that we have found out, though, specifically, is that we've come across 1 or 2 designers that don't or didn't have professional indemnity insurance in place, which is a requirement now under these regulations. They've got to have indemnity insurance in place. So that is something that we have found. So it will form part of the pre-qualification questionnaire and part of the process that you would go through to ensuring that people who we are appointing are competent. So that's it from me, really, as a brief overview and impact of the actual CDM regulations, and I'm opening it up to questions now.
Thank you very much, Simon. Does anybody have any questions, please?
Could I ask one?
Of course.
It's Stephen Reason.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi. Simon, you just mentioned the fact that PD would need to have insurance in place.
Yeah.
What happens where that PD's role passes to a contractor on a smaller site? Is that contractor then expected to have PI insurance? Because
yes.
a lot of contractors,
would.
certainly on the smaller scale, probably don't carry that.
No. What we believe is going to happen is that there's going to be basically a lot of smaller sites, smaller contractors that are going to be unaware of the new duties that are going to be placed upon themselves. So I would have liked to have found some information out for you with regards to the HSE visiting these smaller sites to see whether or not they were issuing advice, or whether or not they were issuing improvement notices, or even issuing fines or prosecutions.
Well, they'll issue a fine, presumably, because they can make money out of that, can't they?
Yeah, they can do, yeah. But yeah, like you said, there's going to be a lot of the smaller sites and the smaller contractors that are going to be flying under the radar, really, to be honest with you. But it is something that they will need to have in place.
That is PI insurance.
It is, yeah.
Because we carry about 5 million, I think, on that, so we're okay. But I mean, a lot of people won't even think of that. So
not at all.
You know,
not at all.
Something that's sort of put on them by default, really, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, could apply to a small one-man band, so an electrician or a plumber or anybody with skills. They're going to be completely unaware of the new duties under the CDM, like you say, for domestic customers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Any more questions?
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining the webinar today. If you do have any questions, just let us know and we can put you in touch with Simon. Thank you very much for joining today, and hopefully we will meet again in the webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.